Hi, entrepreneurship students. So I am going to go ahead and just record the video readings from now on, and we'll still touch base via Zoom, but this way you can go and watch it at your own pace for it to work for your prompts over Fred Factor. So just a reminder, we are reading Fred Factor by Mark Sanborn, and today we are in chapters 2 and 3, which is what we're going to be reading for this week 2 of your continuous learning. And it starts off with a quote from Abraham Lincoln, chapter 2 does, and it says, "Whatever you are, be a good one." And the title of this chapter is The Fred Principles. So, truth is transferable. That's why I will often refer to in this book as a core idea that I believe defines the essence of the Fred Factor. These ideas apply to your life and your work. Here, in summary form, are the 4 principles that I learned from Fred, the postman, that I believe to apply to any person, in any profession, in any situation, at any time. Principle number 1, everyone makes a difference. It doesn't matter how large or even how ineffective an organization is, an individual can still make a difference. You can make a difference. A mediocre employer can hinder exceptional performance. Choose to ignore it and not adequately recognize or encourage it. Or an excellent employer can train employees to achieve exceptional performance and then reward it. Ultimately, though, only the employee can choose to do his or her job in an extraordinary way, regardless of the circumstances. Think about it. Did you add to or take away from the experiences of your customers and your colleagues? So you can think about of your classrooms. Do you add to or do you take away from the experience? Do you move your organization closer to or further from its goals? Do you perform your job in an ordinary way or do you execute it superbly? Do you lighten someone's burden or do you add to it? Do you lift someone up or put someone down? Nobody can prevent you from choosing to be exceptional. At the end of the day, the only question that matters is, what kind of difference did you make? Fred Smith, the distinguished author and business leader, has noted from his years of leadership experience that most people have a passion for significance. I agree. Consider Fred the postman's example. Where others might have been delivering mail as monotonous drudgery, Fred saw an opportunity to make the lives of his customers more enjoyable. He chose to make a positive difference. How about you? Martin Luther King Jr. said, "If a man is called to be a street sweeper, he should sweep streets, even as Michelangelo painted or Beethoven composed music or Shakespeare wrote poetry. He should sweep the streets so well that all the hosts of heaven and earth will pause to say, 'Here lived a great street sweeper who did his job well.'" Fred the postman understood this. He is proof that there are no insignificant or ordinary jobs when they're performed by significant or extraordinary people. Politicians are fond of telling us that work gives people dignity. I agree. Having work to do and the means to make a living for oneself and one's family is important. But that is only half the equation. What we haven't been told nearly enough is that people give work dignity. There are no unimportant jobs, just people who feel unimportant doing their jobs. That's probably why B.C. Forbes, the legendary founder of Forbes magazine, said, "There is more credit and satisfaction in being a first-rate truck driver than a 10th-rate executive." I have met cab drivers who are more inspired about how they perform their work than some upper-level managers who seem to have lost any drive for excellence. While position never determines performance, ultimately performance determines position in life. That's because position is based on results rather than intentions. It's about actually doing what others usually only talk about. Setting a higher standard is more challenging than simply achieving the status quo. Withstanding the criticism of those who are threatened by your achievement depends not on your title, but on your attitude. Ultimately, the more valuable you are to others, the more value you create in your work or your interactions with others. The more value will eventually flow toward you. Faithfully doing your best, independent of the support, acknowledgement, or reward of others, is a key determinant in a fulfilling career. Principle number 2, success is built on relationships. Throughout my life, most of the mail sent to me has ended up in my mailbox. This service was performed by the U.S. Postal Service, which gave me what my postage paid for, nothing more, nothing less. In contrast, the service that I received from Fred the postman was superior for many reasons, the biggest reason being my relationship with him. It differed from the relationships that I've had with any other postal carrier before or since. In fact, Fred is the only postal carrier that I've had the personal relationship with. It's easy to see why Fred stood above the crowd. Indifferent people deliver impersonal service. Service becomes personalized when a relationship exists between the provider and the customer. Fred took time to get to know me and to understand my needs and my preferences. He then used that information to provide better service than I had ever received before. Do you have this capability? Fred is proof that in any job or business, relationship building is the most important objective because the quality of relationship determines the quality of the product or service. That's also why learners succeed when they recognize that employers are human. Sorry, I said learners, it's leaders. Leaders succeed when they recognize their employers are human. Technology succeeds when it recognizes that its users are human, and employees like Fred the postman succeed when they recognize their work involves interacting with human beings. Principle number 3, you must continually create value for others, and it doesn't have to cost a penny. Do you ever complain that you don't have enough money, the necessary training, the right opportunities? In other words, do you believe that you lack resources to perform at a higher level? Then consider Fred. What resources did he have at his disposal? A drab blue uniform and a bag full of mail? That's it. Yet he walked up and down the streets with his heart and his head stirred by the possibilities. His imagination enabled him to create value for his customers, and he didn't need an extra dollar to do it. He just thought harder and more creatively than other postal carriers. In doing this, Fred mastered the most important job skill of the 21st century, the ability to create value for customers without spending more money to do it. You too can replace money with imagination. The object is to outthink your competition rather than outspend them. I've met many people who were concerned that they might become victims of downsizing and lose their jobs. I always tell them to quit worrying. My indifference shocks them. Actually, my intent is to refocus their attention from being employed to being employable. In today's economy, a high school or college graduate should expect to be unemployed a few times during his or her career. But that unemployment will be brief as long as the individual is employable. Being employable means having a skill set that makes you desirable to any employer, regardless of the industry or the geographic location. So what does that skill set look like? Many factors contribute to employability, but I'm convinced that the most critical skill is the ability to create value for customers and colleagues without spending money to do it. The trick is to replace money with imagination, to substitute creativity for capital. Sanborn's maxim says that the faster you try to solve a problem with money, the less likely it will be the best solution. With enough money, anyone can buy his or her way out of a problem. The challenge is to outthink rather than to outspend the competition. In the world of business, the competition is either inside or outside the organization, and sometimes both. For example, you may be competing for a better position in your department or your company. While professional decorum might prevent you from describing it this way, you hope that the best man or woman for the job will get it, and you're working to prove that you're that person. Or there may be an identified competitor in the marketplace. Once, when I spoke at a conference sponsored by a delivery service that considers the U.S. Postal Service a competitor, I was forbidden to use the story of Fred in my presentation. It struck me as odd that the company wouldn't want me to use Fred as an example of the kind of service it aspired to and encouraged all of its employees to deliver. But that's the topic of another book. Because Fred's employer competes for revenue against alternative carriers, Fred either helps or hinders the cause of his company. Most employers recognize that Fred is the kind of employee who will give them a competitive advantage. But I'm not sure Fred or his employer really thought about competition in the traditional sense. Fred is more like living proof that there is another less observable competitor, the job we could have done. The truth is that we compete against our own potential every day, and most of us fall short of what we are capable of doing or being. I may never understand all that motivates Fred, but I suspect that gratification that he gets from excelling in his work and his service is a big factor, as in the joy that he consistently creates in his customers. At the end of each day, Fred has has beaten a silent opponent that threatens his potential, just as it threatens yours and mine. That competitor is mediocrity, a willingness to do just enough and nothing more to get by. And while his competitor may not beat you out for your job promotion or take away corporate market share, mediocrity just as surely diminishes the quality of your performance and the meaning that you derive from it. Principle number 4. You can reinvent yourself regularly. Here's something to consider. If Fred could bring such originality to putting mail in a box, how much more could you do and I do to bring originality to what we do? How can we reinvent ourselves and our work? There are days when you wake up tired. You figured you've read the books, listened to the audio tapes, watched the videos, sat through training sessions. You're doing everything that you can possibly do to produce personal excellence, but you're still fatigued and unmotivated. When your life is at a low tide, when your professional commitment is wavering and you just want to get the job done and go home at the end of the day, what can you do? Here's what I do. I think about the guy who used to deliver my mail. Because if Fred the postman could bring that kind of creativity and commitment to putting mail in a box, I can do as much or more to reinvent my work and rejuvenate my efforts. I believe that no matter what job you hold, what industry you work in, where you live, every morning you wake up with a clean slate. You can make your business, as well as your life, anything that you choose it to be. And that's what I call the Fred factor. Okay, so continuing on, chapter 3, Fred sightings. And here's the quote from Winston Churchill. There comes a special moment in everyone's life, a moment for which that person was born. That special opportunity, when he seizes it, will fulfill his mission, a mission for which he uniquely is qualified. In that moment, he finds greatness. It is his finest hour. Now that I have explained the qualities of a typical Fred, you will better understand why I enjoy discovering Freds wherever I go. I love Starbucks coffee and rarely start my day without it. One morning, as I was driving to Denver International Airport, I swung by Starbucks for my favorite coffee, a grande, a really large cup of steaming coffee. Back on the interstate, I realized that I had created a bit of a dilemma. My car did not have an automatic transmission, which meant I needed one hand to shift and the other to drive. I set my coffee down on the center console until I could accelerate to the higher gear. What were the odds that the coffee would spill? Pretty high odds, actually. Suddenly, a dark, hot stain spread over my right leg from my knee to my hip, and I was wearing light blue jeans. At the airport, I applied some jean first aid by squeegeeing my pants and using the restroom hand dryer. But it still looked like a giant dork, or I still looked like a giant dork. As soon as I checked into the airport Marriott in Atlanta, I called housekeeping. These coffee-stained jeans were the only pants that I have to wear for my return trip home. I explained to the supervisor, is there any chance that I can get them washed overnight? With a lot of sympathy in her voice, she informed me that not only was there no guest laundry, but that the crew that washed linens had left for the day. But she said that she would be glad to pick up my jeans, take them home, and wash them and return them early the next morning. Thankful for her kindness, I agreed to this plan. The next morning, this incredible woman delivered a clean pair of freshly washed and pressed jeans to my door. I will regret that I didn't get her name, although I did write a glowing letter about her to the hotel. But even though I don't know her given name, I know what to call her. She's a Fred. Ever since I met Fred the postman, I have come to realize that Freds, as well as potential Freds, are everywhere. And everyone I meet convinces me that Freds are a lot less the exception to the rule than I once thought. Each one is truly an individual in his or her own way, and here are some types that I have found. There's the funny Fred. Passengers on the 6:15 flight from Denver to San Francisco are rarely at their perkiest. From experiences, I know that the flight is usually uneventful and that all that is heard is an occasional snore. Of course, this can change depending on the flight attendant. On one flight, the passengers were treated with some unorthodox announcements from an unusually creative and witty flight attendant. If you are having a hard time getting your ears to pop, I suggest that you yawn widely, she began. And if you are having a hard time yawning, ask me and I'll tell you about my love life. We're on a final approach to San Francisco Airport. If San Francisco is your final destination, I hope you'll have a safe drive home. There is some blockage on the northbound 101 and it appears to be stalled car in the Market Street exit. But otherwise, traffic appears to be moving smoothly. By now, the usually sleepy passengers were waking up, laughing harder and throughout the plane. After we touched down, the flight attendant was back on for an encore. Unless the person next to you has beaten me to it, let me be the first to welcome you to San Francisco. You'll notice that the airport buildings are in the distance. We won't land at the terminal because it scares the We don't land at the terminal because it scares the heck out of the people inside. That's why we land way out here. That means we'll need to taxi, so please don't stand up until we're parked at the gate and the seatbelt sign has been turned off. For those of you who are first Ks, premiers, and frequent flyers, there are too many of you on board to mention by name, but you know who we are. We thank you for choosing United for your extensive travels. And if you'll leave me a recent picture as you deplane, I'll be sure to mail it to your loved ones so they remember what you look like. My final hope is that when you leave the airplane, you'll do it with a big smile on your face. That way the people outside will wonder just what we do in here with our friendly skies. Here's what this Fred did. She took some risks and had some fun, and as a result, the passengers, or rather her customers, had fun too. Another Fred is an accountable Fred. Jack Foy works as a night auditor at a Homewood Suites in Wilmington, Ohio. One night, which happened to be Father's Day Eve, a woman whose husband was staying at the property called with a special request. She told Jack that for Father's Day, the man's daughter wanted to make sure that her dad had his favorite breakfast of pancakes, eggs, and bacon. The only problem was that Homewood Suites doesn't have a restaurant. So at 7 a.m., when Jack got off work, he drove to a nearby restaurant to pick up the special meal. He also brought a card and used a crayon to sign it, from Daddy's little girl. And then he drove to the hotel, delivered the care package to one very astonished and grateful guest. Oh, and by the way, as a result of Jack's acts of service, the man he had taken such good care of gave Jack's hotel a substantial contract, value-adding accountability. Now that's Fred power. Sorry, there was a lot of glitches in that one. My bad. The next Fred is called a generous Fred. I had just checked into the Crown Plaza at Columbus, Ohio, when I discovered that I did not have enough cash to catch a cab back to the airport the next morning. The person at the front desk told me that the hotel could not advance me any cash on my American Express card, and unfortunately, I didn't have my ATM card with me. I was informed, however, that some cabs did take credit cards, but since I was scheduled to end my speech at 9 a.m. and wanted to catch a 9:40 flight, I was afraid that the additional time required to line up accommodating cab and filling out the accompanying paperwork would make it even more difficult to make my flight. My troubles did not end there. I found that my room key didn't work, so I headed down the hall to the house phone, which was located directly outside the club room. The man on duty in the bar noticed that I was making a call and that I still had my luggage. "Is there a problem?" he inquired. Introducing myself as Nick, I explained that my room key wouldn't work. Introducing himself as Nick, I explained that my room key didn't work. "I'll take care of it," he said, and then he asked, "Would you like a drink on me for your inconvenience?" I accepted his offer and sipped and ate some snacks while Nick called for a new key to be brought to me. Nick was so helpful that once I had my key, I decided to share my embarrassing dilemma with him. He listened. "If all else fails, check back with me and I'll take care of it." He informed me that he was on duty until 7:30 the next morning and asked, "Shall I call you to make sure that you have money that you need before you leave?" I told him that would be very thoughtful. Finally, in my room, I spent the next 40 minutes on the phone with my office, my bank, and American Express. Nothing worked. I was having one of those days. My personal banker said there was nothing that she could do. American Express provided cash, but the process would require D-Day-like planning, and I decided to go back to Nick. "This is embarrassing, Nick," I confessed. "I've traveled all over the world and run out of money only twice in 20 years. I hate to ask this, but can I borrow $20 from you?" "No problem. These things happen," Nick replied, without a moment's hesitation. Opening his wallet, he said, "Here, take 30. I tried to explain that I only needed $20. No, he said. "Take 30, he insisted. "You never know what might come up." We exchanged addresses, and I promised to send him the money as soon as I arrived home. I was both gratified and stunned by Nick's generous assistance. A problem that couldn't have been expediently solved by American Express, Northwest Bank, or even my own office was worked out by one helpful individual who was willing to be of service. $30 is not a lot of money, but neither is it a minor amount, especially when it comes out of one's pocket. Nick had never seen me before, and for all he knew, he would never see or hear from me again. He understood the risks associated with truly being of service, and he was still willing to accept them. When I returned to my office the next day, I mailed Nick a check along with some of my books and tapes to express my appreciation. Has Nick ever been stiffed? Has he ever helped out a guest who failed to either appreciate or repay him? I don't know, but my sense is that he would continue to be of service even if those people that he helped did not always repay him. I believe that about Nick because I believe he knows some important truths about life. He knows that the way to move through life joyfully and successfully is by focusing on what you give rather than what you get. He knows that you don't do the right thing just because you have to, that you do it because it's the right thing to do. Nick knows that being of service is not an obligation but an opportunity. He knows that being helpful is even more fun than being helped. It is kind of funny, but I actually am glad that I ran out of money because I got to meet Nick and he reminded me of what he knows, and that's because, it's kind of funny, but I'm actually glad that I ran out of money because I got to meet Nick and to be reminded of what Nick knows. And because of that, you now know it too. Another type of Fred is the famous Fred. Finding a summer job in the Bronx in the early 1950s was not easy, but young Colin was determined to earn the money that he needed to show up early every morning at the Teamsters Hall to volunteer for day jobs. Sometimes he landed a spot on a soda delivery truck as a helper, then a job cleaning up a sticky soda syrup opened up at a Pepsi plant, and none of the other kids volunteered, but Colin did. And he did such a good job that he was invited back the following summer. That summer, he operated a bottling machine instead of a mop, and by the end of the summer, he was a deputy shift leader. It taught him an important lesson. All work is honorable, he wrote in his memoirs. Always do your best because someone is watching. Years later, the world watched Colin Powell serve as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and lead the military effort in the Gulf War, and establish himself as a champion of education. In 2000, he was chosen as Secretary of State by President-elect George W. Bush. There are more Fred sightings. Here are some other candidates for the Fred Hall of Fame. There was a waitress who had just finished her shift at Morton's in Chicago, and as she was walking to her car, she recognized a man in the parking lot as a guest that she had served earlier in the evening. He was struggling, quite unsuccessfully, to change the flat tire in his car. "Let me help," she offered. In short order, this enterprising waitress got the tire changed and sent the restaurant patron on his way. Another. On a flight to Ontario, the fun-loving steward put on a goofy cap and invited the children to join him in the front of the cabin where he did magic tricks for them. A flight attendant on the same flight sat on the floor with a child in her lap, giving a frazzled parent a much-needed break from her child care. Another one. At Crestbutt Mountain Ski Resort, an employee repaired a skier's disabled car in the parking lot. After work, another employee used his own Forest Service permit to cut down a tree so that the family who was staying at the resort could have a Christmas tree for their holiday vacation. Another. A cable installer in Southern California does a lot more than his official job description. He programs the remote switcher for the new channels, sets the timer on the VCR, and often improves sound quality by repositioning the stereo antenna and speakers. Another Fred. A friend of mine recently went to the movies and forgot her wallet. When she asked an employee if she could write a check, she was told not to worry about it. Instead, she was instructed to drop the money off the next time that she was nearby. After she had taken her seat, the same employee brought her a complimentary box of popcorn and a soft drink. How often does my friend go to that movie theater? Every chance she gets now. Another Fred. Once I had a particularly unpleasant experience trying to get home to Denver from Philadelphia. The airline personnel I encountered at the airport seemed unable or unwilling to help, so I called the toll-free number for frequent flyers and requested a supervisor. She was genuinely empathetic and went to great lengths to make sure that I was booked on a flight that night. Her hard work was greatly appreciated. But even more impressive was the fact that she called my office the next day to make sure that I had made it home okay. Freds indeed are everywhere. You probably have encountered a few yourself. The time has come to ask the critical question. Are you ready to be a Fred? And if so, keep reading. but that's where we're going to stop today. Thank you. That's chapters 2 and 3 for week 2. Best of luck as you complete that prompt.